where, and we'll talk about this in the fun half, but there really does seem to be, and I'm not being conspiratorial here, it's quite possible that one entity takes the lead and then others follow because they all feel that this is the time. But there does feel like there is an attempt by I don't particularly like this word, but the establishment of the Democratic Party to attempt to heal, HEEL, not HEAL, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And
you're saying they're going to bring them to heel?
Well, I think there's an attempt to. I mean, if you look at over the past several weeks, the DCCC announcing publicly that they will not do any business with anyone who is working with a primary challenger to their incumbent candidates. Now, we can argue as to the merits of that or the appropriateness of that entity doing that. It makes some sense, right? They're basically saying we're going to protect our own membership. And to some extent, it's been talked about that they've done this in the past. They just have done it sort of submerged in some way. But the fact that they would make it such a public statement of it is an attempt to intimidate. And they're well within their rights, of course. I mean, this is what political actors do. Nancy Pelosi, not defending Alon Omar, and certainly there are other aspects to this other than her progressiveness that is at issue here, obviously because she is a Muslim, and there's a lot of donors who are highly sensitive to Muslims saying things that they perceive as being anti-Semitic.
Well, the Democrats, they love Muslims when they can use them in photo ops, but then when they have opinions that they disagree with.
We're talking about the establishment Democrats because AOC is a Democrat. So,
sure.
Okay. So we have that example of Alon Omar, and instead of rallying around Alon Omar, what the Democratic establishment and leadership does is open the door for more attacks from Donald Trump and the Crenshaw guy. We also have simultaneously Think Progress, which ostensibly is editorially independent from the Center for American Progress, although Center for American Progress pays the bills for Think Progress.
I saw that it was a union victory to get that editorial independence from 2016. So
yes, and I'm not. It would be. And in the past, there has been a lot of controversy that Think Progress. Some writers have been leaned on, particularly in the arena of writing about Israel and in Palestine. But nevertheless, even if we assume that there is some independence editorially, that doesn't mean that people don't know where their bread is buttered. And when your bread is buttered from a certain place, it doesn't. That's arguably not independent. I mean, George Soros could give me $1 million tomorrow to run this company with the prospect that after I burn through that $1 million, because our burn rate here is about $1 million every month and a half. After I get through, yes. That's why I get so uptight about.
Excuse me. Where is that?
Well, let's just
the
assume.
Commissary fund.
But yeah, the commissary. It's most of that money goes into the food here. But if I know that I'm going to need that extra that other $1 million in a couple of months or in a year, whatever it is, there may be an attitude. I don't think a personal writer cares about it, but listen, your bread is buttered. You're going to flatter that butterer in some way. And so there was a video put out by Think Progress, which ostensibly was a journalistic piece, noting that around the time Bernie Sanders made what people suspect is $1 million off of his book, he dropped the term millionaires from his typical millionaires and billionaires assessment of who's controlling the country's politics. Now, I think there's also put aside the debate as to why he did that. I think there's a decent argument that having a newly formed billionaire class is more problematic than millionaires. I mean, I've seen a lot of data of analysis saying that, like, look, there's ever expanding number of millionaires in this country, and their net worth. I don't know. I didn't dig into it too much, but even if that's the case, that he did drop the word millionaires because his book landed him as a millionaire. You can articulate that in a couple of sentences, and if you have some journalistic thing in there, it would be interesting to do. But the video was, no one I have talked to, even the most ardent anti-Bernie people, have argued that it was a fair video or not a hit piece, and it may be a fact. I don't know how relevant of a fact it is. I mean, we have people at Center for American Progress and at Think Progress who arguably ask for higher taxes. But if someone was to write back, like, why don't you just donate your money? They would miss the point. I mean, I think Bernie Sanders, is arguing you should tax millionaires more, that we have a policy failure when we have this many millionaires and billionaires, even if he doesn't say millionaires. So, I think it's the real point is, and it's perfectly within their rights to do so. You have aspects of the Democratic leadership and the Democratic establishment attacking the progressive wing. And what we just saw is Bernie Sanders hit back and basically a shot across the bow. If you want to make this a bloody war, it will be a bloody war. But there is not going to be a situation where we sit back and allow you to attack us and not have it framed as you fomenting an internal battle amongst Democrats. There is going to be a fight over ideas in the Democratic Party. There's no doubt about it. And there are, two very clear camps. Maybe you could argue three, but let's just call it two on each side of the divide. And this is a fight that should be had in the Democratic Party. I think it's fine to have this fight. But each side is responsible for maintaining some type of balance here. And if they don't, then it's going to be a big war. And so Bernie Sanders is hitting back and is basically saying, like, look, we just showed you what we're willing to do, because they went through the whole litany of things that arguably have made the Center for American Progress corrupt. Funding from corporations, funding from horrible governments like the Saudi Arabia, and in the past, editorial decisions that were made based upon those funding. And so this is Bernie Sanders basically saying, this works two ways. And we are no longer in a position where we can't do that. Bernie Sanders is the biggest fundraiser on the Democratic side at this point. So it's fascinating that this is happening. But I think, frankly, the best time for this to happen is now, because I'd much rather have this battle right now than in this time next year. In the run up to the convention. I have a feeling, though, that we will be, but who knows?
This is beanbag.
This is beanbag.
Call the cops when you see Bernie.
It's great to see how non-ad hominem his response was to that ridiculously odd ad hominem video, too.
Right, but I mean, who's going to ad hominem?
Near a tent.
Yeah, right. I mean,
a bubble.
Like
I think
that's what they act like he's doing whenever he
Scumbag
criticizes her for anything.
For near a tangent?
Whenever he criticizes any
That is
centrist
true.
establishment for anything, or like, let's expand that to progressives in general. We're being ad hominem assholes, but when they do an ad hominem video about Bernie, they're just being like sensible.
Well, this was very strategic too. Of when the first communications that came from the campaign that basically were like, "Look, be nice on Twitter, calm down, like advocate for your candidate, but like do it in a classy way." It's beautiful. Because first of all, that should just be the approach to begin with, because
The initial approach, yeah.
And then secondly, it's like, what a great opening, because anybody who's even remotely fair-minded would be like, they've kind of kept the powder dry.
But here's the thing: is that
It's more credibility for his complaint, is what I'm saying.
yes, but people should also keep in perspective that if we walked out this door and walked down the hall and talked to someone who has voted in every election since they were 18 and they have voted for a Democrat, the chances of them knowing any of what we've just talked about is somewhere between 0 and maybe 2%.
I don't think you should imply that Frank is misinformed like that.
I'm not talking about
frankly.
Frank.
Okay, Jesus.
And so people should understand that this is an internal battle that has more import for people close to things like Twitter and frankly Twitter. And it's not completely meaningless because Twitter is part of real life. This whole idea that Twitter is not real life, it's not all of real life. It may not be the majority of real life, but it is real life. And people are influenced by this who are closest to politics. And I've said this many times before. There is value in preaching to the choir, because the choir is really, particularly when you're talking about, administrative stuff that has to happen around the church. And if you want to talk about what's happening in the community, they're the ones who are going to go to the bake sale and raise the money to go get that new thing down the street that we want to buy to make the community better. The benches in the park or whatever it is. And so this is basically arguments over who gets to control the choir. And that's pretty important. So
It's very important. And may I do another Sopranos reference?
Sure.
Do you remember the episode? Well,
Are you doing anything other than wearing tracksuits now?
No, and watching Sopranos.
Michael's whole life has become a
My
Sopranos
whole life.
reference.
Yeah, exactly. It's an episode where Paulie's haunted by ghosts, and he goes to the priest, and he's just like, the contributions to the general fund should have taken care of this.
Yeah.